Everyone, and welcome to the Development session of the Ability Summit. We're going to be talking about how to shift accessibility left in the development lifecycle, and you'll learn about things like how to test assumptions about basic interaction patterns, and how template linting can save developers time, and about how to use accessibility testing tools to find issues early on. My name is Sarah Higley, and I'm a software engineer in the Cloud and AI division, and I'm joined by Melanie and Fernanda. Why don't you two go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Melanie Sumner, and I'm a senior software engineer at LinkedIn.
And my name is Fernanda Bonin, and I am a program manager in the Accessibility Insights team.
So to start off, one of the ways to shift left is to start at the very beginning when you're still in the planning phase of the development cycle, when you're choosing things like what frameworks to use, what libraries to use, and when you're starting to build some of the basic UI building blocks like buttons and tables and drop downs. And the reason I care so much about this is because I'm a developer on an accessibility team, I see a lot of bugs. And it can feel a lot of the time like drinking from a fire hose, much like the poor person on the screen. And a lot of those bugs really stem from decisions that happen very early on. And let me know if any of these sound familiar. Perhaps there's a tooltip and the screen reader reads the tooltip text twice or 3 times, or maybe not at all. Or say you have an editable grid, and after the user finishes editing the cell and switches back into read mode, focus is lost and it jumps back to the top of the page, or maybe just somewhere unexpected. Or say there's an info pop-up and it has a button on it and it shows up on hover, and you have a bug that says keyboard and screen reader users are unable to access the button. Or here's another real world case I get a lot, which is combo boxes, and there's a bug on a combo box that can show up in a lot of different ways. Perhaps it's a focus problem, like with this combo box shown on the screen, where first we have to open the drop down and then tab into the drop down to filter, which is not very predictable. Or say when you're arrowing down and you're using a screen reader, the screen reader doesn't read each individual option. Or say the value isn't exposed correctly, or the expanded collapsed state isn't exposed correctly. So with a lot of these bugs, what teams expect is they'll come to office hours and they want me to say something like, just add this ARIA attribute to this specific element and it'll be fixed. Bug done, easy. And sometimes that happens, but more usually the answer is a lot more complicated. It's often something like the third-party library that was chosen for the combo box just isn't that accessible. And you can either file issues and maybe even PRs and try to fight for months to get that fixed and rolled out, or you could switch to a different library, which is often very difficult and labor-intensive, especially if you use a number of components from the same library. Or you could roll your own combo box, which means building a combo box from scratch, also not very fun. And sometimes even when the team has built their own combo box from the very start, the accessibility problems are so ingrained into the design that it ends up essentially needing to be rebuilt, which is also very not fun. So because all of you are here listening to this talk, and because all of those options sound pretty terrible, I hope what you're thinking is that, well, now that we know we're going to choose something accessible from the very start, accessibility is going to be part of choosing a library, is building components from the start. And that is a fantastic start. But the problem is, even once you decide to do that, it can be hard to choose the right pattern or the right library. And as a case in point, all of these screenshots of different combo boxes on this slide are from libraries that make claims about their accessibility. Despite stating that these libraries are accessible, all of these combo boxes have accessibility issues. So with all of that, where you can't even trust like what a library says about their accessibility, how do you tell? Like, how do you choose what combo box to use? How do you choose what patterns to follow if you're building your own? And my answer to this, as with most things, is to test it. So we usually think of testing as coming kind of later on, right? Like you have linting in the editor if when you've started coding, or after you have something kind of ready to run in a browser, you write regression tests. And Melanie and Fernanda are going to talk about both of those later. But I want you to also think about testing as something that can happen before you even start coding a specific product. I want you to think about testing kind of basic patterns that you can use in any product. And my team has been doing exactly that. We've been running usability studies with participants with disabilities on some of these very basic patterns. So as an example, on the screen now is a graph of participants that we recruited through a third-party firm called Applause to run usability tests on combo boxes. And for that particular study, we focused on users who are blind or low vision and use screen readers or magnification, or people with mobility disabilities who use keyboard only or switch devices. And that was because for a combo box specifically, that was where we expected accessibility issues to show up. And to run this study, I ended up making 4 different variations of 3 types of combo box. There was the kind of read-only or select-only combo box, where you can choose an option but not type into it. Pretty much the same thing as the basic HTML select element. There was an editable combo box, what you normally think of when you think combo box, that could have autocomplete or filtering. And there was a multi-select. And because I made all of these, I had direct control over what the semantic differences were and what the behavioral differences were. So I could test very kind of explicitly things like how autocomplete affected accessibility and what keys were most expected to use for selection. And even though I've been working on accessibility for years, and I've even been working on combo box accessibility for years, we found results that I didn't expect. Like users expected to open the options dropdown, arrow to a specific option and tab away and have that selection be preserved. Or they expected to use the space key to select options, even though the native element doesn't allow you to do that. And so we ended up capturing all of these learnings, as well as the code used to create all of these examples in a GitHub repository. And not only combo boxes, we've also tested a bunch of other patterns as well, things like form field errors, tooltips, toolbars, modals, and where focus goes with modals, non-modal dropdowns, complex grids that have sorting and filtering and editing and selection, things like that. And all of these, we've run usability tests. We have the code for all of the examples, and as the documentation for the behavior that we found to be most accessible in the same GitHub repository. And even if you don't want to use that specific repository, or even if that repository doesn't have documentation for the patterns you want to use, there's some other resources like the ARIA Practices Guide is a really good one and has documentation about keyboard behavior, semantics, things like that for a whole bunch of different patterns. So you can hopefully, from now on, you can use these pattern libraries, these documentations of accessible patterns to evaluate things like third-party components. And if you roll your own, to kind of use them as a behavior spec for how those components should be built and should behave once you build them. So if we return to that first team that had the inaccessible combo box, in an alternative timeline, if they'd had these resources, hopefully they could have either chosen a more accessible third-party library by comparing the behavior of the combo boxes in that third-party library against the pattern spec, or if they decided to build their own, build it well from the start and catch any issues with the design from the very beginning. And so after making all of these good choices about the UX at the beginning, how do you make sure that accessibility is kept up through the coding process? We're going to go over to Melanie, who's going to talk a bit more about one of the ways LinkedIn is addressing that challenge.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for the insightful information about testing user experience patterns. I'm really excited to share this with my team. I'm also excited to share, to talk about the developer tools that we've been working on. At LinkedIn, we're embracing our accessibility journey. I'm on the accessibility engineering team for presentation infrastructure, and we work directly to support the front-end developers who are building LinkedIn's products. We've seen that there are a few different challenges in accessibility engineering at scale. We need to increase the number of accessibility issues that have automated checks. And for the things we can check, we need to catch issues sooner and prevent regressions from getting into production code. And I mentioned at scale here specifically because LinkedIn's vision is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. This means that it's absolutely vital to produce accessible code no matter what the engineer's experience level or where in the world their team is located. To that end, we've been working on increasing our automated accessibility checks, increasing the ways we can perform static and dynamic analysis on our code. I've been working on template linting for static analysis. Over the past year, we've added new accessibility-focused linting rules into a template linting library that works with Ember.js, the free open-source JavaScript framework that we use to build LinkedIn's products. Ember's strong backwards compatibility guarantee and focus on convention over configuration makes it easier for developers at LinkedIn to focus on productivity. Shared community solutions also help to ensure that we're not reinventing the wheel. As we have been identifying common WCAG failures that would relate to templates, we've been working out ways to write linting rules for them, giving developers an increased amount of support as they craft their code. But I think it's more interesting to show than tell, so I want to show you what that looks like for the developer's experience inside of Visual Studio Code. Here I have the markup for a div element with a role of window. This is not valid markup because window is an abstract role. And the error is indicated right here in my IDE. As a developer, I can hover over the code that has the error indicator, and it will tell me the exact rule that my code violates. I can then choose to fix it or maybe visit the docs to learn more about the issue. We've also added some rules that help improve the content. Not only do we check to make sure that you have a role of presentation if you have an empty alt attribute on an image, we also check the alt attribute with the values to help developers provide more meaningful text to the user. But how else do we decide what to make a rule? While we started by looking at the common failures listed in the WCAG techniques, we also looked at the reports from our manual accessibility testing. We also decided to include best practices so that developers can really make sure that they're delivering quality code. One example of this is one of our newer rules, which requires all inputs to have an associated label. We saw in our manual audit results that missing labels was a significant issue, so we prioritized adding a linting rule for it. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't return false positives. So we provide examples in the documentation to show what is allowed, and then we test the linter against the allowed syntax to make sure that we don't return false positives. For example, there are a few different ways to appropriately associate a label with an input field. Typical approaches include wrapping a label around an input or associating a label element by using the for attribute. But there are also more atypical use cases like using the ARIA label attribute or associating a button to use as a label for a search input field. And we've got developers covered in a few different ways, including improved configuration that is backwards compatible with earlier versions of the library. While we have a recommended rule set that are turned on by default, this can be further configured to fit the needs of your team. We've extended support to not just turn a rule on or off, but also customize whether it's a warning or an error too. This makes it much easier to ramp up teams with linting rules, let them try it out first with warnings, and then switch to errors when your team is ready. Of course, we have the ability to run linting commands in our terminal with the yarn lint command. This will print out a quick list of issues in your terminal, which is super helpful when you need to see a full list of the issues. I find it particularly useful when I want to get a quick picture of what's going on with an app. I can take a screenshot of my terminal and share that list with my team. Of course, these rules are only useful if they're turned on, and like most configurable tooling, these rules can be turned off.
Yes, that's why it's important to add these checks to our automated continuous integration processes and to have a real culture of planning and developing with accessibility in mind.
Yes, talking about that, the other day you were telling me about a useful tool for shifting accessibility left. Accessibility Insights?
Yes, I am a program manager in the Accessibility Insights team, so I can tell you all about it. Accessibility Insights is a suite of free open source tools that can help everyone here build more accessible products. Let me show you more about Accessibility Insights for Web. We have tools to help you check accessibility in web, Android, and Windows applications, as well as a build pipeline integration, a rules engine for Windows, and the new Accessibility Insights for GitHub Actions. Let me show you more about Accessibility Insights for Web. Let's imagine I am a developer and I am creating a new website. At any moment during the development cycle, I can use Accessibility Insights for Web to check the accessibility of my website. Accessibility Insights for Web has two main workflows. The first one is FastPass. With FastPass, you can catch some of the most common accessibility issues in less than 5 minutes, using automated checks powered by Axcore by Deque and an assisted manual check. In my browser, I have the Accessible University webpage, created by the UW with accessibility issues for demonstration purposes, and Accessibility Insights for Web, a browser extension for Chrome and Edge. When I select FastPass, the automated checks run, and within seconds, I have my results. When I expand a rule, each failure shows me more details on the issue, as well as a comprehensive overview of how to fix it, so it can be quickly addressed. I can also download a report or file a bug in GitHub or Azure DevOps. The second step in FastPass is tab stops. As soon as I turn it on and start pressing the tab key, a visualization appears that shows me how a user using keyboard only will navigate my page. This helps me understand if there are any elements that are not receiving focus or keyboard traps that will make navigating this website very difficult or impossible. So the second Accessibility Insights feature is assessment. Assessment is a guided process to help you check accessibility compliance of your website, and this feature will help you assess your accessibility against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.1 AA standard. Accessibility can be complex, and just like putting together furniture from IKEA, it's not something you want to do without instructions. That's why assessment with 24 assisted and manual tests walk you through the process with clear instructions and additional information and examples. For example, when I select the images test, I see that there are 4 different requirements that will help me assess the images in my website. Each requirement has clear how to fix information, and where possible, we also assist the testing by adding visualizations and listing relevant information. In this case, the requirement is highlighting all the images in my page, and it's listing relevant information like the image type, if it's coded as meaningful or decorative, and the accessible name. This makes testing so much easier for me, and it helps me ensure I don't miss anything. If I want to know more information about why I'm testing a particular requirement, you can select the Info and Examples button that will show you more details on why this requirement matters, how to fix information, and an example with a pass and a fail. Using Accessibility Insights for Web early and often in your developer cycle will help you create more accessible products. Now, let me give you a preview of one of our new initiatives that's still under development, Accessibility Insights Action for GitHub. The other day, the engineering manager in our team, Mark, decided to change the brand color of our website from dark blue to sky blue. Because we have integrated Axcore automated checks as a GitHub action in our docs repo, when the PR was submitted, the Accessibility Insights action automatically commented on the PR and indicated that the new color Mark chose fails color contrast. Additionally, you can download a report. And this report is going to be exactly the same report you see in Accessibility Insights for Web. With the Accessibility Insights action for GitHub, there is no excuse to introduce common accessibility issues in your websites. Today, We walk you through different tools and techniques you can use to ensure you create more accessible products for all your users, and how to shift your accessibility left, catching accessibility issues early so they are easier and less expensive to fix. As you integrate accessibility tools and testing as part of your developer lifecycle and ecosystem, you will not only create more accessible products for your users, you also help create a more accessible web. We hope you feel energized to go back and share the content of this session with your teams. And we hope you use these learnings to help you create more accessible products. Thank you.
And thank you, ladies, for this amazing presentation. This was so insightful. Now it's time for the Q&A, and we have a few questions that we would want your answers on. The questions were submitted earlier. The first question that we have is, we have specific rules that we need for our organization's app. Is there a way to add those rules to the template linter? I think, Melanie, this question is for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. That's a great question, and I'm really happy to say that we support it. You are absolutely able to extend any of the existing rules to have specific messages or just customize them to fit your own organization's needs.
Awesome. I'm sure this will be really helpful. The second question is, you talked about two different workflows in Accessibility Insights for Web. How do you recommend developers use each workflow? Fernanda, this question would be for you then.
Thank you. That's a good question. When we created FastPass, we talked with developers and we asked them, how much time do you have between the time you finish a change and you submit a pull request? And they told us, less than 5 minutes. So FastPass is designed thinking of using those 5 minutes to catch common accessibility issues before a pull request. And we recommend using FastPass after every change that might impact accessibility. Assessment is a more comprehensive workflow that will require more time investment. We recommend using it after a full feature has been completed. However, we have lots of documentation, so you can also use assessment while developing to find great guidance and make sure you are doing all the right things.
Got it. Use all of them and read the documentation. The third question that we have is, how would you go about comparing a third-party component that has slightly different functionality from the documented pattern? For example, a COM box where selecting an option immediately performs an action. Sarah?
Yeah, so I like that question because a lot of components and a lot of UI have slight variations from like very vanilla patterns. And I think that's the value in doing usability studies, because then you learn why to do things a certain way and not just what to do. And it's why in the like pattern repository that I've been working on, I try to document not just what the patterns are, but why to do them. And if like there's a pattern that you want that isn't there, I really suggest running your own usability tests, because then you learn not just like the specifics of what you should do for any given thing, but also why. And once you understand why to do something, then you can expand beyond it and make choices for further patterns that don't quite fit any specific mold.
Got it. Wonderful, thank you. The last question that we have is, you presented 3 different techniques. Is the recommendation to use all 3 of them? And if yes, what are the benefits? I think this is a question for all of you. So how about we go in certain order if anyone wants to go first?
I'll take a stab at it. I think we can all agree that all of them are important. Accessibility needs to be considered in every step of the creation of a new product or feature. Do user testing with your basic patterns and evaluate your external dependencies for accessibility before you start developing. While writing code, use linter tools like Ember Template Lint to make sure you're not introducing common accessibility issues. Test your code's accessibility before submitting a pull request, and test your features and products before putting them in front of your users using Accessibility Insights. Having a real culture of planning and developing with accessibility in mind will help you develop more accessible products for all your users.
Thank you, Farah. Melanie and Farah, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, throw all the accessibility in there all the time. But seriously, like, it's so easy to not to miss things if you're not disabled, or even if you are, for disabilities that you don't have. And so it's important to add as many checks in there as possible to try to do things right at the start, to try to catch things in codes that so bugs don't go too far. And then of course, to have your last line of defense regression tests at the end.
So true. Melanie, last words from you?
Yeah, I'm just really hopeful that this encourages everyone to get started or revitalize their accessibility journey. It took us a long time to learn how to develop for the web, and we're not going to learn accessibility overnight. Accessibility genuinely is a journey, and I just hope you all feel so encouraged to go back to work and try these things on your own.
Perfect, thank you. I think this is the extent of our questions. Thank you so much for this presentation. I hope that everybody feels energized to go back and share the contents of this session with their teams, with their accessibility drivers or accessibility champs, and start using those techniques and tools right away. Thank you.
Summit.